Mark thought he had the perfect life, a happy marriage, 2 children, and a career he loved. But during a luxurious weekend retreat on a private island, everything he believed in crumbles. When a shocking proposal from his wife's powerful client exposes deep cracks in their relationship, Mark is thrust into a world of betrayal, anger, and doubt. Struggling to navigate his emotions, he crafts a plan to take back control, only to find himself caught in an emotional storm he never anticipated. As love, guilt, and revenge collide, the story hurtles toward a heart-wrenching conclusion, proving that some choices can shatter lives forever. The sky was a brilliant azure as the private jet touched down on the island's narrow airstrip. Lucy sat beside me, practically vibrating with excitement, her long blonde hair tied in a loose ponytail that bobbed as she looked out the window. I should have been happy to see her so thrilled. But something about her eagerness made my stomach churn. I chalked it up to nerves about the weekend ahead, a retreat organized by William Fellows, our firm's wealthiest client. I was there as the tech guy, while Lucy, the customer ambassador, seemed far more attuned to the world of schmoozing and charm. The island was breathtaking, a crescent of powdery white sand beaches encircling turquoise waters. A lush canopy of greenery shielded opulent villas from prying eyes. It was paradise, and as much as I wanted to hate it, even I couldn't help but feel a twinge of awe. Lucy's laughter bubbled beside me as she clutched my arm. "Can you believe this, Mark? It's like something out of a movie," she said. "Yeah," I muttered, scanning the entourage awaiting us at the edge of the runway. There he was, William Fellows, the man himself. He stood out even from this distance, tall, salt and pepper hair, his casual white linen shirt unbuttoned just enough to showcase a bronze chest. He could have been a walking luxury ad. We were greeted like royalty, each couple escorted to their private villa by attentive staff. Our suite was more extravagant than anything I could have imagined. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered an uninterrupted view of the ocean, while a private infinity pool sparkled in the sunlight. Lucy twirled around the room like a giddy teenager, throwing herself onto the plush bed. "This is incredible," she exclaimed, her blue eyes wide with excitement. "Yeah, incredible," I echoed, though my voice lacked her enthusiasm. That first evening was a blur of gourmet food and fine wine. William was every bit the charismatic host, gliding effortlessly between conversations. Lucy gravitated toward him like a moth to a flame. I tried to dismiss it as professional charm, after all, she had worked closely with him for months, but there was something in her laugh, the way her hand lingered on his arm, that set my teeth on edge. The next day brought more indulgence. Kayaking, snorkeling, lounging by the pool with cocktails in hand. I tried to relax, to shake off the nagging discomfort growing in the pit of my stomach. Lucy, on the other hand, seemed entirely at ease. She floated through the day, her laughter ringing out as she chatted with the other guests, always with William hovering nearby. It was during the evening dinner that the air shifted. We were seated on the veranda overlooking the bay, the scent of salt and hibiscus carried on the breeze. The conversation was lively, the wine flowing freely. Lucy wore a red satin dress that clung to her in all the right places, drawing more than a few admiring glances. She basked in the attention, her cheeks flushed from the wine, or was it something else? After dessert, William stood and gestured for Lucy and me to join him. "Mark, Lucy, would you mind stepping into my office for a moment? There's something I'd like to discuss." I exchanged a glance with Lucy, who smiled and nodded. Of course. His office was a stunning blend of modern design and island aesthetics, with floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the moonlit ocean. He took a seat in a high-backed leather chair, gesturing for us to sit across from him on a sleek white sofa. "I'll get straight to the point," William began, his tone as smooth as the scotch in his hand. "Mark, I've had the pleasure of working closely with Lucy over the past few months. She's an exceptional professional, charming, intelligent, an asset to any team." "Thank you," Lucy murmured, her cheeks coloring slightly. "I've grown quite fond of her," he continued, his gaze shifting to Lucy. "And I'd like to make you an offer." My brow furrowed. "An offer?" William leaned back, the faintest smile playing on his lips. "I'd like to spend the rest of the weekend with Lucy. Just the two of us." For a moment, I thought I'd misheard him. I turned to Lucy, expecting outrage, indignation, anything. Instead, she stared at her hands, her lips pressed into a thin line. "I understand this may seem unconventional," William continued, his voice calm and unruffled. "But I'm prepared to compensate you for your time and understanding. $100,000, deposited directly into your joint account." The words hung in the air like a noxious cloud. My heart hammered in my chest as I turned to Lucy, desperate for her to say something, to reject the absurdity outright. But she said nothing. "Lucy." I finally managed, my voice barely above a whisper. She glanced at me, then at William, her blue eyes clouded with something I couldn't quite place. I agree." The room tilted. My vision tunneled, the edges blurring as the words hit me like a physical blow. I clenched my fists, willing myself to stay calm, to not lash out and shatter the polished veneer of civility. "I'll think about it," I said finally, forcing the words out through gritted teeth. William smiled, clearly pleased. "Take your time. There's no rush." I stood abruptly, not waiting for Lucy as I made my way back to our villa. My mind raced, a cacophony of anger, betrayal, and disbelief. How had it come to this? How could she even consider? The door opened behind me, and Lucy stepped in, her expression a mixture of guilt and defiance. "Mark." "Don't," I snapped, cutting her off. "I need some time to think." She hesitated, then nodded, retreating to the bedroom. I stayed on the terrace, staring out at the moonlit ocean, my thoughts a whirlwind of rage and heartbreak. By the time dawn broke, I had made my decision. The morning sun cast long shadows across the island as I stood on the terrace, sipping a cup of bitter coffee. Sleep had eluded me, my mind replaying the events of the previous night on an endless loop. Lucy had betrayed me, not in the physical sense, not yet, but in spirit. Her hesitation, her compliance with William's outrageous proposal, had driven a wedge between us that I wasn't sure we could ever bridge. Lucy emerged from the bedroom, her blonde hair pulled into a loose bun, wearing a light sundress that danced in the breeze. She hesitated when she saw me, as if gauging whether it was safe to speak. "Mark," she began cautiously, "we need to talk." I didn't look at her. "Talk about what?" "About how you agreed to, sell yourself for a weekend." Her face flushed, a mix of anger and embarrassment. "It's not like that." "Then enlighten me, Lucy. What exactly is it like?" I set my coffee down harder than I intended, the ceramic cup clinking against the glass table. She folded her arms, her voice defensive. "It's an opportunity, Mark. William is a powerful man. Do you know what working with him could mean for our future? For our kids' future?" I laughed bitterly. "You're seriously trying to spin this as some noble sacrifice? Give me a break." Her jaw tightened, and for a moment, I thought she might lash out. Instead, she turned on her heel and disappeared into the villa. I stood there for a long time, staring out at the ocean, letting the sound of the waves soothe the storm brewing inside me. The day passed in a blur. I avoided Lucy, throwing myself into the group activities with a grim determination. Snorkeling, paddleboarding, a guided hike through the island's lush interior, it all felt like a charade. Lucy, meanwhile, stuck close to William. I caught glimpses of them laughing together, their heads bent in private conversation. Each stolen glance was a fresh wound, a reminder of the widening gulf between us. By the time evening rolled around, I was no closer to a solution. Dinner was another elaborate affair, the kind of meal that should have been unforgettable if my appetite hadn't been crushed by the weight of everything unsaid. Lucy sat across from me, her gaze darting to William every few minutes. I kept my focus on my plate, refusing to let her see how much it was eating me alive. When the meal finally ended, William made his move. "Mark, Lucy," he said, rising from his seat. "Would you mind joining me for a drink in my study?" Lucy glanced at me, her expression unreadable. Reluctantly, I nodded, following them through the open-air dining area and down a winding path lined with flickering torches. The study was just as I remembered it, opulent, imposing, and eerily quiet. William poured himself a glass of whiskey and gestured for us to sit. "Have you given any more thought to my proposal, Mark?" I leaned back in the chair, trying to project a calm I didn't feel. "I have." "And?" William asked, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "I have some conditions," I said, watching his reaction carefully. His eyebrows lifted in mild surprise. "I'm listening." "I want to see proof of the deposit, now," I said. "Before anything happens." William smiled, as if impressed by my boldness. He set his glass down and retrieved a tablet from the desk. With a few taps, he turned the screen toward me, displaying the confirmation of a pending $100,000 transfer to our joint account. My stomach churned, but I forced myself to keep a neutral expression. "Happy?" he asked. "Not yet," I said. "I also want your word that this stays between us. No one back at the firm finds out about this." "Of course," William said smoothly. "Discretion is paramount." I nodded, as if I were considering his terms. Then I stood. "I'll let you know." Without waiting for a response, I left the study. Lucy called after me, but I didn't stop. I needed air. I needed space. Most of all, I needed to execute the plan that had been forming in the back of my mind all day. Back at the villa, I locked myself in the bedroom and pulled out my laptop. I had no intention of letting William or Lucy manipulate me into silence. If they thought they could use me as a pawn in their twisted game, they were about to find out just how wrong they were. First, I accessed the joint account William had mentioned. The pending transaction was real, but I wasn't about to let him buy my compliance. I drafted an email to my attorney, attaching screenshots of the transaction detailing the events of the weekend so far. If things went south, I wanted a record. Next, I opened a secure folder on my laptop, where I kept files from work. Among them were confidential reports and client communications, some of which involved William's company. I knew these documents could make his life very uncomfortable if they came to light. I wasn't planning to release them, at least not yet, but they were a bargaining chip I wasn't afraid to use. Finally, I composed a text to Lucy. It was short, to the point, and left no room for argument. "We're leaving tomorrow. Pack your things." The hours stretched long into the night. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering how we had ended up here. When I had married Lucy, I thought I'd found my partner for life. Now, I wasn't even sure I recognized the woman sleeping in the next room. Morning came all too soon. Lucy greeted me with a strained smile as I packed our bags. She didn't question my decision to leave, perhaps sensing that any argument would only push me further away. As we boarded the private plane, I felt an odd mix of relief and regret. Relief that I was removing myself from the toxic situation. Regret that our marriage might never recover from what had transpired. Lucy sat beside me, silent and distant, her gaze fixed on the horizon. I didn't look back as the island faded from view. Whatever lay ahead, I knew one thing for certain, this was far from over. The plane landed with a smooth glide, but my thoughts were anything but steady. I had spent the entire flight trying to piece together what had happened between Lucy and me. I kept replaying the moment she said, "I agree," and the way William had leaned back in his chair, smug and certain that he held all the power. My anger wasn't just at Lucy or William, it was at myself for letting things spiral this far. Lucy walked ahead of me as we made our way to the parking lot. Her steps were brisk, her shoulders tense. Neither of us spoke. The silence between us was louder than any argument we'd ever had. It wasn't until we reached the car that she finally turned to me, her blue eyes hard. "Are you just going to ignore me forever?" she asked. I opened the trunk and tossed the luggage inside. "I don't have anything to say that you want to hear." "That's not fair, Mark. You haven't even tried to understand." "Understand what?" I snapped, slamming the trunk shut. "That you were willing to sell yourself for some fantasy of power and prestige? That you didn't even hesitate?" Her mouth opened, but no words came out. For a moment, I thought she might actually apologize, but instead, she just shook her head and climbed into the passenger seat. The drive home was excruciating. Lucy stared out the window, and I kept my eyes on the road, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. The familiar streets of our neighborhood felt alien, as though we were returning to someone else's life, someone else's home. When we finally pulled into the driveway, Lucy hesitated before getting out of the car. "Mark," she said softly, "can we please talk about this? I know I made a mistake, but—" "It's too late," I interrupted, my voice cold. "You made your choice." She flinched as though I had struck her, then nodded and got out of the car. I followed her inside, where the comforting clutter of our life together greeted me, family photos on the walls, the kids' school projects scattered on the kitchen counter. It was a cruel reminder of what was at stake. Lucy retreated to the bedroom, leaving me alone in the kitchen. I poured myself a stiff drink and sat at the table, staring at the grain of the wood as the alcohol burned its way down my throat. My mind raced with 1,000 questions, none of which had satisfying answers. The next morning, I woke up early, determined to get ahead of the situation. I called my attorney, filling him in on the details of the weekend. He listened without interrupting, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to the chaos in my head. "I'll start drafting the necessary paperwork," he said. "But before we move forward, are you absolutely certain about this?" I hesitated. Was I certain? The image of Lucy and William laughing together flashed through my mind, and my resolve hardened. "Yes. I'm certain." After the call, I went to the office, diving into work as a way to distract myself. But even there, I couldn't escape the shadow of what had happened. My co-workers greeted me warmly, oblivious to the storm brewing in my personal life. It was a stark reminder of how well we hide our struggles from the world. By the time I got home that evening, the house was eerily quiet. Lucy was sitting at the kitchen table, a glass of wine in her hand. She looked up as I walked in, her expression weary. "We need to talk," she said. I dropped my bag by the door and crossed my arms. "About what?" "About us," she said, her voice trembling. "Mark, I know I hurt you, but I didn't mean for it to go this far." "I thought," she broke off, shaking her head. "I don't even know what I thought." I leaned against the counter, keeping my distance. "Do you even understand what you've done? You didn't just betray me, Lucy. You betrayed everything we built together. Our marriage, our family, it all meant nothing to you in that moment." "That's not true," she cried, her eyes filling with tears. "I love you, Mark. I've always loved you. She took a shaky breath. "I got caught up in something I didn't know how to get out of." "Don't," I said, my voice sharp. "Don't make excuses. You knew exactly what you were doing." She looked down at her hands, twisting the stem of her wineglass. "I didn't want to lose you," she whispered. "You already did," I replied, my tone flat. For a moment, the only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator. Then she stood, setting her glass down with a decisive clink. "I'm not giving up on us," she said, her voice steadier now. "I'll do whatever it takes to fix this." I laughed bitterly. "You can't fix this, Lucy. You crossed a line that can't be uncrossed." "Maybe I can't," she admitted, her chin trembling. But I have to try. I watched her leave the room, her shoulders slumped in defeat. Part of me wanted to believe her, to give her a chance to make things right. But the damage had been done, and I wasn't sure if forgiveness was something I could offer. As the days passed, I threw myself into my plan. I met with my attorney, gathered evidence, and began to disentangle my life from Lucy's. She tried to reach out, leaving notes and sending messages, but I ignored them all. The house felt emptier with each passing day, the silence a constant reminder of the chasm between us. Then, one evening, I received an email from William. It was short and to the point. "I've reconsidered our arrangement. I hope this resolves any lingering tension. Best regards, William Fellows." Attached was a confirmation of the cancelled transaction. The $100,000 was gone, as if it had never existed. It should have felt like a victory, but all I felt was hollow. I forwarded the email to my attorney and closed my laptop, staring out the window at the darkening sky. This wasn't the ending I had envisioned, but it was the one I had chosen. And now, I had to live with it. The weeks that followed were a blur of paperwork, arguments, and tension. Lucy and I had made the decision to live under the same roof for the time being, primarily for the kids. Emma and Daniel, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing beneath the surface, continued their routines as though nothing had changed. I envied their innocence. Lucy kept her distance, though her attempts at reconciliation persisted. She left notes on my desk, small gestures like fresh coffee in the morning, and once, she even attempted to make my favorite dinner. But each effort only deepened the divide. I didn't want to be wooed or charmed back into the life we had built. That life was gone. The strain began to show. I'd catch glimpses of Lucy standing at the window, staring out at nothing, her shoulders hunched as though carrying an invisible weight. She wasn't eating much, and her vibrant energy seemed to have been sapped away, leaving behind a hollow shell of the woman I had once loved. I tried to ignore it, telling myself this was what she deserved. But some part of me, a part one hated, still cared. One evening, Emma came into my home office, holding a crumpled piece of paper. "Dad," she said hesitantly, "I found this in Mom's room. I think it's for you." I took the note from her, my heart sinking as I read Lucy's familiar handwriting. "Mark. I know I've hurt you in ways I can never undo. I don't deserve your forgiveness, and I don't expect it. But I want you to know that everything I've done, every mistake I've made, has only ever been because I didn't know how to hold on to the person I love most in this world. I'm so sorry. For everything." I folded the note and set it aside, brushing off Emma's concerned gaze. "It's okay, sweetheart," I said, forcing a smile. "Go finish your homework." After she left, I sat there staring at the note, the words etched into my mind. For the first time in weeks, I felt the faint stirrings of doubt. Had I been too harsh? Had I allowed my anger to blind me to the possibility of redemption? That night, I decided to talk to her. To lay it all out, my pain, my anger, my doubt, and see if there was anything left worth salvaging. I knocked on her door softly, but there was no answer. I knocked again, louder this time, then pushed the door open. The room was empty. Panic gripped me as I searched the house, calling her name. She wasn't in the kitchen, the living room, or the backyard. Her car was still in the driveway, but her purse and phone were gone. My heart pounded as I checked every room, hoping to find her somewhere, anywhere. It wasn't until I noticed the back gate swinging open that dread settled over me like a heavy blanket. I stepped outside, the cool night air biting at my skin, and followed the faint path that led into the woods behind our house. The trees loomed overhead, their branches casting eerie shadows in the moonlight. "Lucy!" I called, my voice echoing through the stillness. A flash of red caught my eye, a familiar scarf tangled in the underbrush. I moved faster, the pounding of my heart almost drowning out the crunch of leaves beneath my feet. Then I saw her. She was sitting on the edge of the ravine, her legs dangling over the precipice. Her blonde hair glowed silver in the moonlight, and she seemed so small, so fragile. "Lucy!" I shouted, running toward her. She turned at the sound of my voice, her face streaked with tears. "Mark," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm so sorry." "Don't do this," I said, dropping to my knees beside her. "Whatever you're thinking, don't. We can fix this. We can figure it out." She shook her head, her eyes glassy and far away. "I've ruined everything, Mark. You don't need me. The kids don't need me." "That's not true." I reached for her hand, gripping it tightly. "We need you, Lucy. I need you. Please, just come back with me. We'll figure this out together." For a moment, she seemed to consider it. But then her gaze drifted back to the ravine, her grip on my hand loosening. "I've made so many mistakes. I can't take them back. I can't fix this." "You can," I said desperately. "We can. Just take my hand." Her lips trembled as fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "I'm sorry, Mark. For everything." And then she let go. Time seemed to slow as I watched her slip from my grasp, her body disappearing into the darkness below. I screamed her name, my voice raw and broken, but it was too late. The sound of her body hitting the rocks echoed through the night, a final, devastating punctuation mark on a tragedy I could never undo. I stumbled to the edge of the ravine, peering into the shadows. Her lifeless form lay crumpled among the jagged rocks, her red scarf fluttering in the breeze like a cruel mockery of life. The weeks that followed were a blur of funerals, condolences, and endless questions from Emma and Daniel that I couldn't answer. I told them it was an accident, that she had lost her footing. They didn't need to know the truth. They didn't need to carry the weight of her choices, or mine. At night, when the house was silent and the kids were asleep, I replayed those final moments over and over in my mind. If I had just reached her sooner, if I had said the right words, if I had forgiven her sooner, maybe she would still be here. But regrets are a cruel mistress, and they offer no solace. In the end, all I had left were the echoes of what might have been and the haunting knowledge that some wounds, once inflicted, can never truly heal.